Downstream from Carmarthen, the River Towie widens out into an estuary. On the western side of the estuary lies the picturesque village of Llanstefan, with its own 12th century Norman castle and a church dedicated to St. Stephen. Inside the church, on the east wall of the chancel, is a stained glass window, the top of which contains 3 interlocking circles. One circle contains a cross and represents Christ. Another contains a dove and represents the Holy Spirit. A larger circle intercepts these 2 circles and represents God the Father. The circles are reminiscent of communion wafers. Indeed, the theme of the window is the Eucharist. The work was created by John Petts, who lived in the village. A more famous work of Petts is in a church in the United States. On August the 28th, 1963, black civil rights leader and Christian preacher Martin Luther King made a famous speech in front of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
He called for an end to racism in the United States. In his speech, he quoted from the American Declaration of Independence. King called for a world where people would be judged by their character and not by the colour of their skin. Just over 2 weeks later, on the 16th of September, a bomb planted at the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, exploded, killing 4 black children. John Petts heard the news of the bombing on the radio. He was horrified. He contacted the editor of the national Welsh newspaper, the Western Mail. On the front page of the following day's paper, an appeal was launched to raise funds for a stained glass window to replace the one destroyed in the blast. The money was quickly raised, and Petts visited the church to get an idea of what they wanted. According to Petts,
they had never heard of Wales. They had no idea where it was, but they were very quickly told something of the little country Wales was, and how it put great value on independence and freedom.
Petts came up with the design inspired by wording from the Gospel of Matthew. Truly, I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers, you did it to me. The window shows a black Christ with arms outstretched on a cross, one hand pushing away hatred, the other welcoming with love. At the bottom is a message, given by the people of Wales. The window was installed in 1965. In an article written for The Guardian in 2011, Gary Younge quotes then 16th Street Baptist Church pastor Reverend Arthur Price.
I think the major message we try to take out of the window is not so much identifying Christ's color, but knowing that Christ identifies with us. To the white community, this is that the Jesus you love identifies himself with the African American community. So you are really crucifying him again when you persecute someone who does not look like you.
Emmanuel Ogbonna, CBE, is Professor of Management and Organisation at Cardiff Business School. An article on the Cardiff University website explains how Professor Ogbonna is leading the plan to make Wales an anti-racist nation.
A plan to make Wales an anti-racist nation has been launched, drawn up by a group co-chaired by Cardiff University academic Professor Emmanuel Ogbonna. Drawing on Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities' experiences of racism and race inequality, the Anti-Racist Action Plan sets out a series of actions focused on the next 2 years. It focuses on the ways in which racism affects the lives of ethnic minority people, such as their experiences of racism in everyday life, services available to them, their role within the workforce, and the lack of visible role models in positions of power. The goals and actions in the plan cover policy areas across government, including health, culture, homes and places, employability, skills and education, as well as a focus on leadership and representation within the Welsh Government and across public services. Following the launch, Professor Ogbonna, based at Cardiff Business School, said,
"Today is a very important day in the history of Wales. We have chosen to follow the path of anti-racism."
The term anti-racism was coined by United States academic Ibram X Kendi, formerly known as Ibram Rogers, who changed his name to Kendi to sound more African, then added the X for that Malcolm X vibe. In an article from 2003 titled "Living with the White Race," Rogers explains his worldview.
Europeans are simply a different breed of human. They are socialized to be aggressive people. They're taught to live by the credo, survival of the fittest. They are raised to be racist. Caucasians make up only 10% of the world's population, and that small percentage of people have recessive genes. Therefore, they're facing extinction. Whites have tried to level the playing field with the AIDS virus and cloning, but they know these deterrents will only get them so far. This is where the murder and psychological brainwashing and deception comes into play. Europeans are trying to survive, and I can't hate them for that. However, I'm not just going to sit back and let them physically, mentally, socially, spiritually, and economically destroy my people.
Kendi brought out a book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, in which he advised,
"The only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination."
Following the death of George Floyd in the United States, Kendi has made a very lucrative career telling white people how racist they are. In an interview on the Cardiff University website, Ogbonna explains his connection to Cardiff.
My guest is Professor Emmanuel Ogbonna. Emmanuel, welcome.
Thank you.
I have a quote here from the Cardiff Business School website where it says in the profile for Professor Emmanuel Ogbonna, he joined in 1990, but he then, and it quotes, progressed through the ranks and was appointed to his present professorial position in 2002, which implies a sort of effortless ease, which I think is typical of your approach to life, shall we say. It shows an attitude. And you've been here quite a while.
I have been.
So you came and never left. Why did you not leave?
Cardiff has been a wonderful place. For me, for my family, I came here as a student and then was convinced by one of the lecturers that I really ought to do a PhD, and I thought, okay, I'll give it a try, like all things in life, and I started a PhD, and then I enjoyed it, and then finished it in 1990. Around the same time, my wife was finishing her program. She became an accountant, a chartered accountant, and got a job in Newport, and we both essentially had jobs in the area and then stayed. And my wife became a director by 1994, in which case I could no longer leave because I kind of became a kept man by that point because she was a director and I was a lecturer. And I stayed on, and our two daughters were born here. So Cardiff has been a wonderful place for me. And I progressed to become a senior lecturer by 1997, a reader by 2000, I think it was, and then a professor of 2002. So essentially, one of those few people that rose through the ranks from student to lecturer to senior lecturer to reader to professor.
Yes, that's an incredibly sort of linear pathway. I think we do have one or two others that have done something very similar, but it is relatively rare.
Ogbonna's career does not seem to have been overly impacted by racism, but he is convinced that the lives of other black and minority ethnic people in Wales have been blighted by it. Professor Ogbonna has evidently been influenced by Ibram X Kendi.
For one thing, we were lucky to be able to publish our findings because, as you know, they didn't allow them to publish their findings in England. Mm-hmm. In England, they still don't believe there is such a thing as institutional racism. You know, the Metropolitan Police still don't believe in institutional racism, even though they've been found to be institutionally racist twice, two different government inquiries. But in Wales, we were lucky because the political leaders allowed us to publish our findings, much to the disgust of some people in society, but we were able to publish those findings. And publishing those findings meant that the First Minister, the Deputy Minister at the time, and subsequently Minister for Social Justice and now Chief Whip of the House, leader and chief whip of the house, were able to come together along with the cabinet and said, we will do something about institutional racism, and asked us what to do. We recommended that we should have a different approach. By the time the Welsh government already had a race equality action plan they were planning to implement, and I argued against that and said a race equality plan was not going to achieve what we should be looking to achieve. Why did I say that? Because we've had race equality plans for many generations.
And nothing has really happened.
Yes. It's the same as equal opportunities in a sense. Equality, diversity, and inclusion. It doesn't do anything to address the systemic injustices that certain groups, especially black and minority, the racial groups and ethnic groups have had in generations in society. It doesn't do anything to redress the power balance. If anything, it victim blames.
Yes.
And it says when there are problems, then it must be to do with the groups. We've given you an equal opportunity to succeed. If you are not succeeding, there must be something about you or your group. We have to try and help you. Let's do more mentoring. Let's do coaching. Let's do anything but address the structure of power that is conspired to keep your agency low.
Professor Ogbonna has written an article titled Making Wales an Anti-Racist Nation, a Public Value Mission in Action. In the article, Ogbonna lists a number of statistics showing that people from ethnic minority communities are faring less well compared to their white counterparts, and implies that the cause of this discrepancy is racial prejudice. There are, of course, a multitude of factors that could explain the discrepancy, but these have not been considered. Ogbonna writes,
I drew on existing research on race and racialization to position anti-racism as the only approach that will help to eliminate racism. I drew on my own research to argue that, contrary to the understanding of many, racism is not dichotomous, in that the opposite of racism is not non-racism. Instead, I positioned racism as a continuum, wherein the racist individual is at one end, the non-racist is in the middle, and the anti-racist is at the other end. Significantly, this understanding suggests that the opposite of racism is anti-racism. This is because while non-racism may be positive in intention, it is passive in action.
For white people in Wales, it is no longer good enough to be colourblind. We need to be actively engaged in dismantling structural oppression. Ogbonna ends his piece as follows.
As the implementation process unfolds, we envisage that there will be challenges in managing the multiple and competing demands of the different stakeholders that are involved. the government, public institutions, businesses, white ethnic group, and ethnic minority groups. We anticipate that members of ethnic minority groups who have been burdened by racism for so many generations will be impatient and expect change to be rapid and comprehensive. Conversely, businesses and institutions are likely to be concerned and may even protest against the perceived cost of any changes that will be required. The government is likely to grapple with its own internal culture challenges to ensure that it represents the beacon of good practice that it is encouraging others to emulate. And white society is likely to embrace a mixture of support, fear, and anxiety, as some may erroneously view this as a zero-sum game that disadvantages them.
It is not obvious what Ogbonna means by white society. There's never been apartheid in Wales. The problem with identity politics is this. In defining yourself as what you are, you're also defining yourself as what you are not. So as well as giving us a sense of belonging and purpose, identity gives evidence of where our allegiance lies and fuels stereotyping, prejudice, and division. We stop seeing individuals when all we see are tribes.
They came to Bethsaida, and some people brought a blind man and begged Jesus to touch him. He took the blind man by the hand and led him outside the village. When he had spit on the man's eyes and put his hands on him, Jesus asked, "Do you see anything?" He looked up and said, "I see people. They look like trees walking around." Once more, Jesus put his hands on the man's eyes. Then his eyes were open. His sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly.
The Race Equality Action Plan was published in 2021. Mark Drakeford and Jane Hutt contributed a ministerial foreword. Emmanuel Ogbonna and Dame Sian Morgan contributed a co-chair foreword. The document states,
Privilege, or white privilege, is when the majority of decision makers who are white do not take into account the automatic privileges of position, resources, influence, authority, and historical beliefs on superiority and inferiority in decision-making and the ways in which these can disadvantage Black, Asian, and minority ethnic people.
The document contains some difficult-to-measure goals.
By 2030, young Black, Asian, and minority ethnic people will see that together we will have seen that the media can no longer shoehorn us into a box as entertainers and slaves. Ensured that mixed heritage children and their parents don't have to choose the white identity to hide behind because of racism. By 2030, Black, Asian, and minority ethnic people and others will have a situation where people no longer get asked, "Where do you come from?" but are accepted for their commitment to Wales and so seen as Welsh. Had courageous conversations about white racism and internalized racism. Stimulated conversations that white people needed to have to come to terms with white privilege and white fragility.
The policy and strategy page of the Anti-Racist Wales Action Plan website quotes the black rights charity, the Runnymede Trust. Racial inequalities persist in almost every arena of British society, from birth to death. On the 5th of September 2022, a black man was shot by an armed police officer in Streatham Hill, South London. The man was driving a car that was believed to have been involved in a firearms incident the previous evening. The car was contained between two unmarked police cars, but there was enough space left to allow the driver to manoeuvre the vehicle. Armed officers approached on foot. The driver did not surrender. Instead, he attempted to use the car to smash his way through the blockade. A police rifleman heard the screeching of the car tyres and, concerned about the danger posed to his colleagues, fired a shot. The shot was fatal. The black man was Chris Kaba. In the following days, there were demonstrations across the country. There was also a demonstration in Cardiff. In September 2023, the Crown Prosecution Service authorised a charge of murder to be made against the police officer. On the 8th of March 2024, the police officer pleaded not guilty to that charge. At that point, the anonymity order on him was partially lifted. The police officer was named. The jury at his trial in October 2024 took 3 hours to consider their verdict. On the 21st of October, they acquitted him. In response to the verdict, the Runnymede Trust tweeted,
"The legal system doesn't deliver real justice for families bereaved by racist state violence."
The head of the National Education Union, the main teaching union, Daniel Kebede, said that Chris Kaba was a victim of two-tier justice. British-Nigerian activist and lawyer Dr. Shola Mos-Shogbamimu tweeted,
"This is injustice. Martin Blake killed Chris Kaba in cold blood, but because he's white and cloaked in authority of institutionally racist Met Police, he's been acquitted of killing unarmed black civilian by an equally racist justice system. White supremacy personified. Feigning fear of life is always justified for police to kill black people. The system isn't broken, it's working exactly as it should."
Wadana Babar from Cardiff University School of Law wrote an article for The Justice Gap. In the article, she quoted Deborah Coles, director of Inquest.
"We know that Chris's death is not an isolated case, but part of systemic racism and stereotyping that equates black men with dangerousness. For decades, black men have disproportionately been killed by the police."
Professor Ogbonna is very keen to accuse organisations of being institutionally racist. He does not appear to be sensitive to how his words can be used to demonise white people who work in those institutions. A reason that Kaba may have chosen to attempt to smash through the blockade came out after the trial. Kaba was a violent criminal. A week earlier, he had shot a man in both legs. Since the verdict, it has been reported that fellow gang members of the gang that Kaba belonged to have put a bounty on the policeman's life. When you're primed to see racism, you can see it everywhere. An updated plan was released in 2024. The updates include a commitment to set a recruitment target for the Welsh Government for 20% of successful candidates recruited externally to be of a minority ethnic background. Only 6% of the Welsh population are of a minority ethnic background. As Ibram X Kendi states,
"The only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination."
In their introduction to an anti-racist Wales, the Welsh Government have chosen to include quotations not from Martin Luther King, but from the Black Panthers.
Seize the time. If you are not part of the solution, you are part of the problem.
The Black Panthers were a Marxist-Leninist group who raised money to buy weapons by selling copies of Mao Zedong's Little Red Book. On the death of Mao Zedong, Deng Xiaoping became paramount leader of the People's Republic of China. He is widely regarded as being the architect of modern China. In 1993, he was quoted as saying,
"Some think that inciting the people is democracy. In fact, inciting the people is to start a civil war. We know the lessons from history."